What should you look for when buying a second-hand bike? The process can be quite daunting if this is your first time going through it, so here are some things to look out for. The first thing is a good price. You might not know the value of bikes or the bike that you're looking to buy, so you need to do a little bit of research to find out how much they tend to go for. My favourite way to do this is to use a website like AutoTrader and filter out the bike that you're looking to buy with the kind of age and mileage that you're looking at. For this first step, don't worry about where the bike is located, you're just getting a feel for prices, you're not actually going to pick one up yet. So don't worry about filtering out ones that are close to where you live or anything like that. Once you've seen maybe 10 or so bikes, you'll start to get an idea of how much that bike is worth and how much they tend to go for. Bear in mind things like service history and condition, because these can also affect the value of the bike. You want to be looking to buy a bike that's kind of the average price of what you've been looking at. If you find a deal, that's great, but if you see a bike that's far too cheap, that is definitely a red flag. A good deal may be something like £100 or £200 under the average you've seen, and this is quite common if the owner wants to sell their bike quite quickly. But if the bike is like £1,000 less than the average and the description doesn't say that there's a problem with the bike, avoid it. There's probably something wrong with it. So you're looking for a decent deal, but not something that's so cheap that it's likely to have some issues. The next thing to look at is paperwork and admin. There's quite a few things to do in this area. First, you can check the MOT history of the bike. So if you Google MOT history check or something, it should come up with the government website. You can type in the number plate of the bike and it will tell you all of its past MOTs. This is a good opportunity to see if the bike has had any issues in the past, but don't be put off if the bike has failed some of its MOTs. The reason will be listed there, and there will also be any advisories listed. So if it's failed for something small like a headlight beam misalignment, then it's not really an issue as long as it's been fixed and as long as it has a valid MOT when you buy it. But if it's a major issue that's failed the MOT, take a note of that. If it's failing very often on major issues, it might be a bike that's prone to having things go wrong with it. Make sure that the bike has a valid MOT before you buy it though, to make sure it's safe to ride home. You can also use the MOT history to see how many miles the bike has done every year and get a feel for the condition of the bike. I'll go into more details about this later on. When you see the bike, you want to see the V5, which is also known as the logbook, and you want to check some things here. Check that the frame number or the VIN number listed on the V5 is the same as the one on the bike, and check things like the engine number too. You want to make sure this is the exact same bike you're buying and it's not one that's been parted out or anything like that. Check that the service book matches the bike with the registration and details and things like that, and check that the stamps in the service book are genuine as well. A full service history is great, but don't be put off if the bike doesn't have one. Sometimes you get a home mechanic servicing their own bike. I plan on servicing my own bike, and as long as they have receipts to kind of show what they've done, then that's not always a bad thing. You can always get the bike checked at a garage if it makes you feel better once you've bought it. You want to check that the address on the logbook matches the address that you're viewing the bike at. You don't want to view the bike at any other address, even if the person says they'll come meet you in the middle or something like that. You want to view the bike at the address that it's registered at. Check the person's ID too to see if they're the actual owner of the bike and that you're at their real address. If you're not at their address, don't buy the bike. If they're not the real owner, don't buy the bike. If they tell you something like they're selling it on behalf of their friend or their aunt or their nan or something, that's great, but you're not buying the bike. Don't buy it unless they're the owner every single time. If there's no paperwork, walk away. You don't want to get mixed up in that. It's really not worth it. You can also check that the bike is HPI clear, which means that there's no outstanding finance on it. You can do this online along with some other background checks. Sometimes you have to pay for these to see if the bike has been reported stolen or written off or anything like that. But it's worth doing just for some peace of mind. See how many owners the vehicle has had. It's common for a 125 or a sort of beginner bike to be sold fairly soon after buying it, so don't be surprised if you find a bike like that that's had a new owner every year. But if the bike has been sold multiple times within a year, it might be a sign that the bike is a money pit or needs a lot of work doing to it. There's a reason why people are trying to get rid of it so quickly. It's also a good idea to ask the current owner how long they've had the bike for and why they're selling it, just to sort of get a feel for the bike's history and how well it's been looked after. The fun part is actually checking the bike over. First thing you want to look for is the mileage relative to the age of the bike. It's hard to give an exact number on what you should or shouldn't buy, but generally if the bike is almost brand new with loads and loads of miles on it, it's possible that it used to be somebody's touring bike or daily commuter, and this comes with additional wear and tear. You can probably expect to have to do some maintenance or repairs to the bike eventually, if it's got very high mileage. If the bike is very old but the mileage is super low, it's possible that the bike has been sitting idle for a long time and also may need some work doing to it. This is fine, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't buy it, it's just something to look for and to bear in mind. Generally look for anything that seems out of place, and get a bike that's at least done some miles every year. For my 125 I think it's done about 3,000 or 4,000 miles a year, so it's been used but it's not been really heavily abused. Next thing to check is the tyres. This is a good indication of how well looked after the bike is generally. If the tyres are bald, not only are they expensive to replace, but also it's a sign that the owner may not have kept up to date with maintenance on the bike. New tyres are great, it saves you money, it shows that the owner has at least put some care into looking after their bike. Next thing is to look for is signs of crash damage. This is fine if the owner has declared that, the bike's been dropped or it's been crashed or something like that. But if they're claiming that the bike is fine, and you can see things like scratched paint, scuffed mirrors, the bar ends are damaged, the levers are bent, it's a sign that the bike has been dropped or crashed in the past. For a beginner bike, it's kind of expected for the bike to go down at some point, but it's a nice check to see if the owner is honest with you. If they say, look, I've dropped this bike a couple of times while I was learning, then that's fine, it's going to bring the value of the bike down, but at least they're honest with you. If they're telling you the bike is perfect, and you can see that it's not, there may be some other things that they're trying to hide too. If this is a bike you're buying just to learn on, I wouldn't worry too much about these things, as long as mechanically the bike is fine, but bear in mind that somebody else has thrown the bike around a bit before you. This might be good because at least you can get a good deal on it, but it's worth noting that the bike has some damage when you buy it. Next thing to do, and I'm going to make a separate video on this, is to run through all of your weekly checks. It's a good idea to perform these on a new bike you're about to buy, and the BOLTS acronym is a really helpful one to remember. B stands for brakes. Check that the front and rear brakes both work and release smoothly. O stands for oil. Check that nothing is leaking, and check the oil level with the dipstick. It doesn't matter too much if the oil is low, but again, it just shows that if the level is good, the bike has been quite well looked after. L stands for lights. You want to check pretty much anything that has a bulb in it. Indicators, brake lights, headlights, lights on the dashboard. Check that these are all working and visible. T stands for tyres. You want to check the tyre condition and the pressure. It might help to bring a portable tyre gauge or a small portable inflator with you, so if the tyres are flat you can at least inflate them before you take it home. S is for steering. See if you can move the steering all the way to the left and then all the way to the right. There should be no clicking or resistance while you're doing this. The second S is for suspension. You want to push down on the front and rear suspension and see that they both operate and release smoothly. If you push down on the front suspension and you get some oil residue on the front forks, this might be a sign of some bearings that have gone or something. Again, doesn't mean don't buy it, it's just something to keep in mind. Buying a second-hand bike is a great idea, especially for your first bike, and I would almost never recommend buying a bike brand new, just because they lose so much value and it's almost never worth it. But hopefully these tips ensure that you're buying something that's going to serve you well. Keep an eye out for future videos on daily, weekly checks, and especially good bikes for beginners. Let me know what you think in the comments if you have any other tips, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.